Thank you. Please be seated. We are back on the record in the matter of State of Utah versus MacNeill. Mr. MacNeill is present with his counsel. The state's attorneys are present. The doctor is on the stand and the jury is again seated. Mr. Perkins, you may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. Okay, Dr. Thompson. Before we move on where we were, I believe we were talking about the surgeries that you performed on Michele. Before we move on from there, I just wanted to clarify some of your prior testimony regarding the extra drugs of Percocet and Valium. And specifically with Percocet, would you clarify who it was that requested that drug?
Martin.
Thank you. When it comes to, let's fast forward now again back to the procedures that you performed, and how did the surgery go?
It's a long surgery to do that many procedures at once, and it went very smoothly. There were no problems with vital signs or anesthesia or bleeding. There were no complications during the surgery. And I would describe it as successful and uneventful.
Okay. You said it was a long surgery. Do you recall about how long it was?
It was scheduled for 8 hours. I don't know if that's how long it took or not, but it probably took close to that. And I remember calling Martin when I was done at the end of the day, and it was early evening when we spoke.
Earlier we talked about liver function and how certain drugs are cleared through the liver. Is the anesthesia that's administered one of those types of drugs?
Yes. Again, I don't know all of the specific drugs, which one is cleared by the liver and the kidney. Those are the two organs that clear most of these drugs. But yeah, there would be multiple drugs administered during the surgery that would be cleared by the liver.
If there were any complications with the liver that arose during the surgery, would there be symptoms that you would recognize?
Possibly, or
Sustained. I'm not certain who is the anesthesiologist.
Okay. Who was the anesthesiologist in this surgery? Let me ask you this: was it you?
no.
Okay. Have you observed patients post-operatively emerging from anesthesia before?
Yes.
And is there, based on your education, based on your experience, is there an expected time range in which they would emerge from the effects of anesthesia?
Yes, it varies from one individual to the next, but yes, there's a kind of a routine or a normal post-operative wake-up period, I guess.
Was Michele's wake-up time during this procedure or after the procedures you performed, was that normal or not?
It was normal as far as to my knowledge.
Okay. If I could have 1 minute, Your Honor. May I approach the witness?
You may.
Dr. Thompson, I'm giving you a folder containing exhibits that are marked 2 through 13. Would you peruse those briefly?
Okay.
Do you recognize those photographs?
I think I've seen some of these before.
Okay. Where have you seen them before?
In this room or one similar to it.
Okay. When was that?
It was several months ago.
Okay. In relation to this case?
Yes.
Do you recognize the subject of those photographs?
It appears to be Michele MacNeill.
And what's the context of them?
This appears to be some photos that were taken after she died.
Okay. Do you see incisions on her body?
I do.
Where are they?
They're pretty much exactly as I described for the surgery. All the incisions I see are incisions that were related to her surgery.
Okay. All of them?
Yes.
Are there any that are not? Excuse me. Are there any that you see that are not a result of the procedure?
No.
Okay. May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would move to admit, or the state offers exhibit number 10 into evidence.
No objection.
Is it multiple photographs?
It is just one photograph, Your Honor.
One? May I see it?
Yes.
Ten is received.
Thank you. And Your Honor, may I-
Go ahead.
Exhibit number 10, would you describe the contents of that photograph?
This appears to be a photograph of a portion of the scalp on the right side with an incision just posterior to the hairline.
Okay, posterior to the hairline, will you clarify that?
That just means it's in the hair-bearing portion of the scalp, a couple of centimeters behind where it starts, where the forehead ends.
Okay, thank you. Is that incision, we've kind of covered this already, but that one is specifically, is that part of the surgery?
It is, yes.
Thank you. Will you describe the normal post-operative routine for a patient who's undergone surgery like this?
For me, patients that undergo this type of surgery, I typically recommend that they stay overnight in the hospital for one night to be monitored for their breathing and their vital signs and pain medication and nausea, all the things that we've talked about that are typical for post-operatively. Usually the first 12 to 24 hours is when those symptoms are the most severe. And then they are discharged the following day. And then I see them several times during the first 10 days following surgery.
Okay. When it comes to the immediate time, or the time immediately after the surgeries, did Michele follow the same routine?
She did.
Will you describe that with her case specifically?
So I don't know the exact timing of everything, but when we finish the surgery, the patient goes to a PACU area, which is where they're under very close supervision by a nurse, and they're usually still very sedated at this point and not interactive at all, because it takes usually an hour or two for the anesthetic effects to wear off. And then once the patient's awake and they can answer questions and they're behaving appropriately, then they would be transferred to the floor. And I typically will see the patient while they're in that PACU area, that immediately after surgery, while they're usually still asleep, and just check on everything for bleeding and vital signs usually. And
Is that, I think you've said that's where they come out of their sedation?
yes.
So about how long are patients normally in there?
Typically 1 to 2 hours, I would say, but it varies.
Do you recall Michele's time?
I don't know.
Do you rather recall whether there was anything abnormal?
No, I don't think there was anything abnormal.
Okay. Were there any complications at this point?
No.
When it comes to, you mentioned keeping patients overnight and why you do that. Did Michele stay overnight?
She did.
Did anyone request an early discharge for her?
If they did, I don't know about it.
Okay.
I see the patients very early in the morning, and so Typically, they're discharged about 9 or 10 a.m. the following morning.
Okay. If someone wanted to have her discharged, to whom would they have made that request?
The nursing staff.
Okay. And would the nursing staff contact you in that?
If I've already seen the patient and cleared them for discharge, then they wouldn't need to contact me, but if they hadn't, then they would.
Had you cleared Michele for just discharge at this point?
At what point?
I'm sorry, before the overnight stay.
No.
So the next morning, do you recall that date?
I can look. It would have been the 4th of April.
Okay. Did you visit Michele that morning?
I did, yeah.
And what specifically were you assessing at that point?
The things that I would check for at that first visit are the vital signs, which have been recorded at multiple periods throughout the night. The drain outputs, I put little drains in to collect any blood or fluid that collects under the skin. The function of the facial nerve, which is in the area of where I'm operating during the surgery, to make sure that that's intact, and the vision, because I've been working around the eyes, and any hematoma, which means bleeding under the skin that's unusual or excessive.
Okay. Will you describe what Michele would have looked like at this point?
At this point, she would be likely quite swollen in the face. I have a fairly tight bandage that's wrapped around the face for that first night, just to help prevent bleeding and fluid collection, and that was on, and I take that off in the morning. I remove the drains, and that's when I kind of assess all of these things. Okay. She would be talking to me and answering questions.
In the morning?
Yes.
Was anything on her eyes overnight?
Typically we'll put some little cold ice pads on the eyes to keep the swelling down.
Do you recall whether that was done with Michele?
I'm sure it was, but I couldn't tell you 100%.
Did you record in your file any observations that you made on her specifically the next morning?
Just that I recorded all her vital signs. I recorded all the things that I talked about with the facial nerve, the bleeding, the incisions, the dressings, and everything was in order.
Okay. Do you recall whether anyone was present, any of Michele's family were present that morning?
I don't recall if anyone was there or not. I'm quite sure Martin wasn't there, because we would usually have a conversation that I think I would have remembered. There may have been one of her daughters there, but I don't really know.
Okay. Will you describe Michele's discharge process?
So once I've assessed all of those things, then I give the nursing staff authorization to discharge her when the family comes and picks her up, and sometimes there'll be questions and things between that period, and they'll call me if there are. And the instructions for discharge and wound care have already been gone over at that point in the preoperative visit, and so the patient, I usually, if they have any questions about the wound care, we'll go over it at that time, and then if everything's good, we'll send them home.
Okay. And was that done with Michele?
Yes.
Were there any complications that you noted before she was discharged?
No.
When was the next time that you visited with Michele?
That was the 6th, 2 days later.
Okay. And is that normal?
Yes, that's when I check again all the incisions. I check for infection, for bleeding, and I have kind of a checklist that I go down and look at.
So do you have a kind of a set routine for visiting with patients after they've had surgeries like this?
Yes.
And I think will you go over it one more time?
Yes, so I see them the first day in the hospital before I discharge them. If they've had eyelid surgery, I'll usually see them at postoperative day 3, so that'd be 2 days after that visit, and usually remove the eyelid incisions at that, or the eyelid sutures at that time, and place tapes on the incisions. And then usually 2 to 3 days later, I'll see them again to take out some more stitches and assess everything. And then also, usually at 10 to 14 days, I'll do one final visit to remove sutures, and then usually I give them a few weeks before I see them again.
Okay. I moved forward before I wanted to. When it comes to Michelle's appearance at this point, we talked about her bandaging. What would her skin and incisions have looked like?
On that first day, or just swollen, maybe some bruising, and sometimes the patients can't even open their eyes at that point because there's a lot of swelling around the eyelids, and I would say that's fairly typical that they can't open their eyes.
Was that the case with Michele?
Yes.
So when you mentioned that you, the next morning, you changed bandages, and will you describe that?
So there's, like I said, there's a bandage wrapped around the face, and I'll usually talk to the patient for a few minutes first and ask them how their night was and check their drains, and then I just take a pair of heavy scissors and cut the bandages and peel them off and check the incisions and pull out the drains.
Did you do that with Michele?
I did.
What type of bandages do you replace any type of bandaging?
Yes, I'll send them home with an ACE bandage at that point that just provides a little bit of light compression on the incision, but it's nothing like the original one.
Okay. And did you do that with Michele?
Yes.
When Michele was discharged, do you recall whether she was walking?
She was, I was not present when she was discharged, so most people get wheeled out in a wheelchair from the hospital because it's a long walk, and so that's the typical routine. But they would be up to the bathroom and things on their own before they're cleared for discharge.
Did you see any of that with Michele?
No, I didn't.
Was she in bed the whole time?
She was in bed when I saw her, yes.
So I don't know how you would refer to this. I don't know if it's the first post-op in the hospital and then discharge, and then the second post-op.
Usually the first one, the day after surgery, would be considered the first post-operative visit, and then the next one, when she comes into my office, would be the second one.
Okay, so let's talk about that second one. What date was that again?
That would have been April 6th.
Okay. Do you remember whether Michele came on her own or whether she had company?
She would have come with someone. Every time she came, she was with someone.
Do you recall who was with her at this visit?
I don't.
Would you describe Michelle's recovery process at this point?
I would say it was fairly typical. She was fairly swollen. Most people are concerned with how they look at that point because their face is pretty swollen, and so we'll talk about some of those things and talk about the normal process of swelling and recovery from surgery, and we'll just kind of go through some of their questions and make sure their pain's under control and their symptoms are resolving.
Did Michele have any complications?
No.
Did she have any unusual reports of pain?
Not that I recall.
Do you recall whether there were any problems with her medications at that point?
I don't think so. I don't have anything indicated in my notes, but I don't remember if we discussed the pain medications at all or any other medications.
If we could take a moment to discuss your notes, when do you make an annotation in your file on a patient?
Typically, the notes are made at that visit or shortly thereafter when the patient leaves the office.
Let me ask this, I will clarify. In addition to when do you decide to record something in your notes?
Oh, well, if I always record the things that are kind of on my checklist, and then if there are other additional relevant pieces of information, then I'll include those, but I don't include everything that happens or that's said in the note.
Okay, if someone's progressing normally, would you note that necessarily?
Yeah, I would. I mean, I'll say that things are normal. It's more when things are abnormal that I'll make more notes.
Okay. Was anything abnormal about this visit?
No.
Was Michele walking at this visit?
Yes, she was.
Did she need assistance?
I'm sure she had someone on her arm, just again because of the swelling, and usually with eyelid surgery, usually people just need a few days before they can see, their eyelids are not as swollen, they can see normally again.
Were you able to assess at this time, at this visit, what Michele's vision was like?
What I will do on these visits, especially for this first one when or the second one where I'm taking out the stitches, is if their eyes are swollen shut still, then I'll force them open and have them look from side to side and make sure that they can see me. If her eyes were open partially, then I wouldn't do that, and I don't remember whether or not I did that.
Okay. Let's go to day 5, I believe. Is that the third?
Yeah, it was the 10th, which was actually actually, you're right, I think I saw her. Yeah, I saw her on the 8th as well.
Okay. What's normally going on this?
That visit is where I removed the stitches and some of the front of the ear to show. I removed those.
Are you removing them because the incision is completely healed?
No, I'm removing because I don't want them to leave marks in the skin.
Okay. And how do you assist the healing of the incisions after?
So I just put some tapes called Steri-Strip on the incisions to reinforce, and typically there's enough strength in the incision if you tape it up at 4 or 5 days.
When you're visiting with a patient 7 days after surgery, what are you looking for?
At that point, I'm usually expecting a lot of the swelling to start going down a little bit, the bruising to start going down. I'm usually hoping that they're walking around a little bit and becoming a little bit more active. Nothing strenuous, but again, I'm primarily removing more stitches and then just doing kind of a basic assessment of me looking at them and talking to them.
Okay. Do you check up with your patients regarding the medications during these postoperative visits?
Typically, I will ask them about pain, and usually at this point, at this post-op day 7 visit, I'm usually not asking about other things except maybe sleep. It's usually if they bring things up to me, then I discuss them. But I typically am asking people if they're starting to wean off of their pain medications at this point, because this is usually when you start to not need them as much. And everybody's different again.
Sure. Did you ask that of Michele?
I don't know for sure. I can't remember.
If you were to consult your file, would that help you remember?
Well, I do know that I gave more prescriptions at that visit, but those prescriptions were not requested at that visit. A phone call for Martin was made to get those prescriptions refilled, and that's when they were refilled.
Okay. When it comes to whether you asked Michele what she was taking at this point, if you saw your notes or if you consulted your file, would that help you remember?
There was a comment after me asking those questions, but not specifically to Michele. This was after everything happened.
Okay. Were there any complications that you noticed at this visit?
No.
Was there anything unusual?
She had something called chemosis, which is swelling of the eyelids, and that's pretty typical. And I gave her some medications, and those are prescriptions for the swelling in the eyelids. And then, as I said, I did give more prescriptions for Percocet and Phenergan, but those those were requested by a phone call after the visit.
She didn't ask for them at the visit?
Right.
How did that visit end?
I was happy with how everything was coming along, and I think she was starting to get excited about, she was starting to be able to see the result a little bit because some of the swelling and things were going down, and she was positive, and I was very happy with her progress.
When did you next hear from the MacNeills?
The next day.
What happened?
And that was, I'm sorry, it was 2 days later. I saw her on the 10th, and then I got a phone call on the 12th, an urgent call. Oh, I'm sorry. The phone call came on the 11th, and that was an urgent phone call from Martin stating that Michele had been found unresponsive in the bathtub, and resuscitative efforts were begun, and she was at the emergency room at that point.
What was his demeanor like?
He seemed frantic and very upset.
Did he say why he was calling you?
No, but I assumed he would call me since she had had surgery recently.
Okay. What was your reaction?
I was very upset.
And why was that?
I just don't like to have complications with my patients, and anybody that's kind of still in that immediate post-operative period, I'm following them very closely, and it's just very upsetting.
So when you receive notice that a recent patient has had complications, what's your routine? What do you do?
Well, it just all depends. I've never had anything like this before or since. Usually they're smaller things, and I usually will have them come into my office, and you know, if it's an infection or something, I'll have them come in and we'll check it out. But this was different.
What were your concerns in Michele's case upon learning that she was unresponsive?
I was worried about what the possible cause of her unresponsive state could have been. I was worried about maybe she wasn't walking around enough and got a blood clot in her leg.
What could that do?
And then a blood clot in the leg can cause a pulmonary embolus, and that's one of the probably the more common causes of acute death after surgery. And that could happen anywhere, you know, between the first day and a couple weeks after surgery.
When you considered Michele's case, what did you think about the pulmonary embolus?
That was what I was kind of worried about because it was such an acute, sudden thing. And so that was the first thing that came to my mind, but I don't...
Was there anything else that you were concerned about in her case?
Well, I always worry about medications because, you know, and particularly in this case, there had been a lot of medications prescribed, and so I asked some questions of Martin and her daughter. This was after that initial phone call, and asked them some questions about the medications that she was taking, and they indicated that she had been weaning off of those medications. She was down to 1 to 2 Percocet per day, which is what I would expect at that point in time.
Okay. When it comes to the blood clot, did that grow in concern, or did you rule that out? How did you?
I just waited to hear. I was, you know, that was probably one of my my biggest fears and worries. And I called one of my colleagues that had a lot. Well, the person that trained me actually, and
Non-responsive.
Sustained. Can you proceed by question and answer?
Yes. I think we'll just proceed on.
Go ahead.
After that phone call you received from Martin, did you have any other interactions with him?
yeah, I spoke with him on the phone several times in the next week or so, and
Do you know the outcome of Michelle's complications?
I really don't, and
Not necessarily the diagnosis, but
oh,
did you find out whether she survived or died?
my understanding was that she had died on that original phone call that he gave to me, and they had done all the resuscitative efforts that they could, but she had not been able to be resuscitated.
Okay. You said you interacted with him later. Do you know when that was?
I don't have the actual dates of when I called him, but I did call him probably 2 or 3 times over the next 4 or 5 days to check in and see, check on the family and check on him.
What was his demeanor on those?
He was very morose and just seemed very unhappy and depressed.
Did you attend Michelle's funeral?
I did.
Could I have a minute, Your Honor?
You may.
A couple subjects I'd like to revisit with you real quick. When it comes to, you mentioned that you reissued or refilled some prescriptions at the visit on the 10th.
Mm-hmm.
Will you restate whose request that was?
That was Martin.
And if I recall your testimony, that came over the phone.
Yes.
Did you discuss why you were refilling those? Was for?
So I guess what I should say is I did not speak with him directly. I had a message from my staff that they had spoken with him and he had requested refills on the medications.
Okay. Your visit on the 10th with Michele before she died, do you recall her demeanor?
She, as I said, I felt like she seemed pretty positive and upbeat and was excited, and she was smiling, and I was happy with her demeanor. Was
she able, how was she moving?
She was walking on her own, probably with a little assistance. I don't remember if she had someone on her arm, but she walked from her car into my office and back out.
Any problems with that?
No.
Okay. I think I'll tender the witness at this point, Your Honor.
Thank you. You may cross.
Good afternoon, Dr. Thompson.
Hi.
How are you today?
I'm nervous.
Understandable. Fair to say that sometimes when you're nervous that affects your memory?
I don't know.
You've been interviewed about the circumstances in relation to Michele MacNeill a number of times, right?
I have.
First one was on February 25th of 2009.
I don't have those records, but I'm sure you do.
Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah.
Okay. And at that interview, Doug Whitney and Jeff Robinson, investigators, came and
Yes.
talked with you
Yes.
at your office.
Yes.
Okay. And at that interview, one of the first things they told you is that they were investigating Mr. MacNeill for criminal activity and asked you if you'd seen the news.
I don't remember if they mentioned that. They told me that I wasn't the subject of their investigation.
When I ask you a question, you can just answer my question, and then if there's anything more that the county wants you to follow up with, then they can.
Okay, sorry.
Okay. And may I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Okay.
need you on the record, I'm sorry. Whatever you've said, I need on the record.
Okay. I'm showing you a transcript of your interview, just asking you to review it and see if it refreshes your recollection.
Okay, so,
Okay. So the question is do you now recall Mr. Whitney and Mr. Robinson informing you right off the bat that they were investigating Mr. MacNeill?
yes.
And asked you if you'd seen the news?
Yeah, I see it right there, so yes.
And the next time they came and interviewed was also at your office, right, on June 27th of 2011?
Sounds right?
And they asked a number of the same questions as they did the first time?
Yes.
And you gave honest and truthful answers on both of those occasions, right?
Yes.
And then the third time that you've been formally questioned about this was on October 3rd of 2012 at the preliminary hearing in this court. Is that right?
Yes.
And you gave honest and truthful answers at that time as well, right?
Yes.
When you first saw Martin and Michele MacNeill in your office, they seemed happy together.
They
right?
did.
And in fact, you described them as happily going back and forth with each other as they were discussing the options.
Yes.
And in that first visit, Martin told you that he was a little concerned about hypertension and that he wanted to get it checked out before the preoperative visit, right?
No, not at the first visit, at the second visit is when hypertension. Or maybe he did. I really, it could be.
Let me just show you your preliminary hearing transcript.
Actually, I think that's right, because that's why he got it checked out subsequently. So yeah, I think that's correct.
Okay. And after they went back and forth with each other, they both mutually wanted to go forward.
Yes.
And you didn't get any indication that Martin was being overbearing and pushing the surgery, did you?
I didn't.
And in fact, you wouldn't have offered the surgery if you felt that way, would you?
That's correct.
You had no reservations about proceeding with the surgery?
I didn't.
And you had in this case, which I assume is typical, at least 3 different opportunities to discuss the surgery. The initial visit, right? Then the preoperative visit, right?
Correct.
And then right before surgery.
Right.
And on each of those 3 occasions, your patients have to express a desire to go forward for you to proceed with surgery.
That's correct.
So even on the day of surgery, if there is any hesitation in going forward, you wouldn't perform the surgery, right?
Well, if there's hesitation, we'll talk about it. But if there's, serious doubts or hesitation, then we wouldn't do the surgery.
And if a patient expressed a desire not to go forward at the preoperative visit, you wouldn't go forward with the surgery, would you?
Correct.
From your experience with Michele, her blood pressure was always very stable, right?
Yes.
And although Martin was a little concerned about it, you didn't personally observe anything.
I never observed any high blood pressure.
And on the morning of surgery, her blood pressure was monitored multiple times to make sure it was safe, right?
Correct.
And there was nothing that caused you any concern about proceeding with surgery about her high blood pressure, correct?
Correct.
After one of your patients has a surgery such as this, you expect that they won't be driving for 1 to 2 weeks, correct?
That's correct.
And in this case, you saw Michele on April 10th of 2007, correct?
Right.
And she was not in a condition that you would expect that she would be able to drive, correct?
I don't think so. I mean, I know she came with someone, but I kind of leave that judgment up to people.
And you've discussed whether you thought that she could drive with the investigators in this case, correct?
I'm sure, yes.
And fair to say that you told them that she absolutely would not have been able to drive based upon the nature of swelling that you saw on April 10th?
I may have said that. Like I said, some people, it goes down faster and they can drive. It just depends. But I don't remember.
On the visit on April 10th, you noted in your records that she had chemosis, correct?
Yes.
And that she was concerned about swelling, correct?
Right.
And also that she was still taking at least 1 to 2 Percocet a day, correct?
Yeah.
And fair to say that you would not recommend anybody to drive if they're taking even 1
Yes.
Percocet?
Yeah, I think that's true.
May I approach, Your Honor?
You may. Go ahead.
Dr. Thompson, I'm showing you a copy of the transcript from your interview on June 27th,
Okay.
2011, correct? You just review this.
Okay.
And you're free to look at the next page too.
No, so I just said that she shouldn't be driving at that point.
Fair to say that you said she definitely should not have been driving at that point.
Yes, it says it right there.
And in fact, I always insist that you've got to have rides until the swelling around the eyes goes down, right?
Correct.
You can't drive if you're on any pain medications,
Right.
correct? Michele had swelling all around her eyes on April 10th, correct?
She had chemosis, yes, and swelling.
And she was still on pain medication.
Right.
She shouldn't have been driving.
Right.
You just testified about the Percocet medication being refilled on April 10th, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Your testimony today was that that medication was refilled pursuant to a phone call, correct?
That's my memory.
That's never been your memory before, though,
Okay.
has it?
All right. Well, why don't you remind me?
Well, have you ever said that in any interview that you've had before?
I don't know.
Is there anything in your notes to indicate that the Percocet was refilled pursuant to a phone call?
That was just my memory of it.
That's your memory as you sit here today, right?
Yes.
You've talked about your memory before, correct?
I'm sure, yes.
Can you just impeach him with the inconsistent statement? It's not you're not refreshing his recollection, so just tell him what it is.
Yes. I just wanted to give him an opportunity to see it. On June 27th of 2011, the investigators suggested to you that they think Martin called in for that prescription. Do you recall that?
I don't, no.
Okay. Do you recall telling them that that couldn't have occurred because the prescription has to be done in writing for Percocet?
I don't recall that either, but that is true.
That's true.
Yeah.
Right? So So the prescription would have had to have been delivered.
Or picked up by someone,
Picked
yes,
up by
right.
someone, right? And in that interview in June of 2011, you never said that Martin called in to ask for that prescription to be
Okay.
refilled, did you?
Apparently not.
And in February of 2009, you didn't say that Martin called in to have that prescription refilled, did
Okay.
you? In fact, is that true?
It seems to be, yes.
And in fact, in both of those interviews, you said that you don't know who asked for that prescription to be
Right.
refilled.
Right,
Correct?
right. And I don't think I said definitively this time either. I said, I think this is what I remember.
Yeah. And so that's your memory today.
Right.
Which is different from your memory in June of 2011 and February of 2009.
Okay.
As well as in October of 2012. You didn't say that Martin called in that prescription then either, did you?
Okay. I didn't, no.
You didn't, did you? You've continued to see media coverage about this case, haven't you?
I don't read any of it.
Don't hear anything about it?
I hear things, but I don't read anything, and I try to minimize my exposure as much as possible.
Continue to talk to the investigators about this case?
Just one phone call since the last time I was in this room.
In the preoperative visit on April 1st, you testified that Martin, Alexis, and Michele were there, correct?
Right.
And in that visit, all three were enthusiastic about proceeding with the procedure, correct?
I'm not sure what Alexis's level of enthusiasm was, but maybe you have something.
At the preliminary hearing, you testified that Alexis was enthusiastically supportive of her mother.
Okay?
Is that correct?
Yes.
Is that consistent with your recollection now?
Yes.
Okay. Nobody told you at that April 1st visit that they wanted to postpone the surgery, did they?
No, I don't think so.
In both of your visits, both the initial appointment and the preoperative visit on April 1st, you considered Martin very protective of Michele,
Yeah, I did, yeah.
very concerned about her.
I did.
And you don't recall Martin ever giving you a list of medications that he wanted you to prescribe, do you?
No.
It's very common for Phenergan and Percocet to be prescribed together, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's also common for your patients after they've had surgery to go home with nothing obstructing their eyes, correct?
It just depends. Sometimes they go home with the iPad, sometimes they don't.
In this case, you've testified, as I understand it, that normal medications that you prescribe would be Lortab, normally in pills.
Correct.
Correct? And then you normally prescribe Ambien.
Correct.
Correct? And then you normally would prescribe the steroid, which is the Medrol dose pack.
Right.
Correct? And then an antibiotic, Keflex or cephalexin.
Correct.
Right? And the erythromycin.
Eye ointment, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And then in all of your prior interviews, you've said that Phenergan is a normal prescription for you as well, correct?
I don't, if I said that was a normal prescription, I typically don't give that one to every single patient.
But you give it to a number of your patients?
Yeah, I do.
And so you had no concerns about prescribing Phenergan?
No, I didn't.
And the Phenergan prescription you gave was for suppositories, correct?
Correct.
You didn't give any prescription for oral Phenergan?
I don't know that for 100%.
Well, why don't you look at your records then to make sure? You've got your prescription pads in there.
Well,
And they all...
the second Phenergan I gave, I didn't indicate whether it was a suppository or an oral, the one that I gave on the 10th, so I'm just not sure.
Okay. The one that, the prescription that is in there
Yeah.
is for suppositories, correct?
I think so. Let me just double check. Yes.
And most likely that you refilled the prescription in the same fashion originally?
Yeah, I mean, you could look at the record and find out. I don't really know for sure. Sometimes I call in the oral at that point. Sometimes I do the rectal. It just kind of depends.